So just a little bit of an intro to what's going to happen for the session. So what we'll do is that we'll give a little bit of a background about the challenge, the problem statement, the tech, and then also the process. And then we have a guest speaker that will be talking about the coral health and climate change from the Great Barrier Reef Foundation. And then if you have any questions, we'll take them on after all of the presentations. So let me just share my screen. Great. So I think to start off first is I wanted to basically give an understanding of like what the motivation of the challenge is. And really it's undeniable, especially this year, where there's an increase in a lot of the disasters that's been happening, from floods to hurricanes to drought to wildfire, not just in the region, but also kind of like globally. The recent IPCC report basically is stating, which is something that we all of us already know, that climate change and global warming is actually human basically induced. And so we're really in a climate emergency, and we think that everybody can actually play their role in potentially addressing this problem. So the good thing, though, is that also that we think that space technology can actually play a big role in the growing climate change issue. And the good thing as well is that with rapidly accelerating technologies like computing, nanotech, AI, robotics, and biotech, the space technology has been democratized, dematerialized, and demonetized, and now it's like cheaper, much faster, and it's definitely more accessible. So what does this really mean? Today, everybody can make a difference. In the past, like, data is very hard to get, but today, especially a lot of the government satellites are now giving data available to the public for free. We also have data analysis tools as well that are now free. They used to be really expensive. And so today, anybody, whether you're a student or you're a startup, just with a Wi-Fi and a personal computer, you can actually actually work on data and data analysis to potentially leverage all of this technology to work on these issues. So for the Space for Planet Earth Challenge this year, we wanted to incentivize people to actually create teams, define an approach for potentially looking at these issues, and then apply to join the incubation program that is part of the challenge.
Yeah, so Emmeline will describe later the timeline of the challenge. It's a 6-month process with a lot of support for the teams that want to take on these challenge areas. The Space for Planet Earth Challenge has 2 problem areas. One is carbon sequestration, which is how much carbon is being sequestered, is being as a carbon sink in some of the land and ocean environments. And then the other is the monitoring the health of coral in the oceans. And so we've divided these into 2 levels, categories. For the university and startup category, we focus on carbon sequestration. And our problem statement is using satellite data in combination with other data sources help develop verifiable methods to measure carbon sequestration on land or in coastal areas. And so the standard way of looking at this has been with monitoring the extent of forests, for example, with well understood how much carbon is being sequestered in the forest. But if you could generalize this into other areas like different kinds of forests or native bush or pastures, wetlands, coastal areas, then you can help and provide incentives for land managers and farmers that make use of turning parts of their land into replanting with native bush and things like that. And because there's a huge carbon sequestration benefit from all these different areas. And we've partnered with the company Planet to provide satellite data, but there's also a whole variety of other kinds of data that the teams can access, from ground truth about the land use, and then there's European Sentinel-2 multispectral data and Sentinel-1 radar data, and there's NASA's ISAT-2 LiDAR, or the New Zealand LiDAR from the aircraft, and there's microwave sensors. So there's a whole variety of different data sources and approaches that could be used in this aspect of this problem. So in our partner Planet is offering basically a research license with a subject to the terms and conditions that you only use the data for the research, but basically 5,000 square kilometers per month of data is available from the satellite archive and from even as recently as satellite data that's just captured today. And so we have connections with Planet for training sessions and technical support. Just as an example of some of the there's this one company in New Zealand that monitors forests, and they were able to show, for example, just monitoring day by day the Planet data, you can see where the wind is blown down some of the trees in the Planet data, and then they use a higher resolution to monitor the effects in that area. But so you can really tell what's going on in the land cover in detail with this kind of data. Then on the second category, the high school category, our problem statement is about coral health. Help improve the monitoring of coral health changes due to climate change using satellite technology. And we're starting people off with a key resource, which is the Allen Coral Atlas, which uses Planet data and has been analyzed to identify different kinds of coral structures and also geomorphic structures underwater. And it has lots of different references and data training, and it gives you a real good foundation for examining the coral. And Vivian can later on talk about what some of the issues about coral health that we might be able to monitor. But just the Allen Coral Atlas provides a great baseline as a start, and will help teams get into the process of examining this. And plus, they can also use the free satellite data, in addition to this. So we have.
So before I turn it over to Vivian, I just wanted to go through the mechanics of the process of the challenge. So as Eric mentioned, there's two categories. There's one for high school and one for university startups. The application requirement is very simple. Essentially, you just need to be either a high school student or a university student, a startup that is in residence in New Zealand, Australia, and the Pacific Islands. The price for both categories for the universities is 30,000 New Zealand dollars, and then for high school it's 10,000 New Zealand dollars. Both will have 15,000 equivalent in data vouchers, as well as mentorship for 6 months as well. And then for the high school, you also get a scholarship to the US-based Mars Moon Virtual Astronautics Academy program. As part of the challenge, we're also running a virtual research incubator, which is going to be between November to January of 2022. And this really means that we're going to be supporting you with webinar sessions, access to specific satellite data from Planet, and then also mentorship. So how to participate in the incubator is you basically submit a short proposal, which includes really who's on your team, which specific aspect of the problem you're addressing, and what's the general technical approach that you're going to be using. Also a draft of what you're planning and your schedule, as well as if you have any other requests for any technical support or mentorship that you'll need. The deadline for the proposal is the 31st of October. And then for the actual final application deadline, that's not until the 31st of January 2022. And the requirements are, it's just a 5-minute video to demonstrate what you've actually done, and then also a presentation deck for your solution. So one thing to note is that you don't need to be in the incubator to actually submit your application on the 31st of January. And so at that point, we would down select to 3 finalists from the high school level and then 3 finalists for the university and startup level. And then we would invite those finalists to actually demo and pitch on 18 February next year. So really, why are we doing the challenge? We really want to have actionable outcomes that would come out of it, and which would mean that if the solutions that come out would contribute to the current climate research initiatives that are happening already in the region, that would be a really great impact. Then also if it could incentivize more carbon capture using biomass and help new carbon credit schemes either within New Zealand, Australia, or the Pacific Islands, and then also for specifically for the coral category, where maybe it could potentially create more reserves to preserve endangered regions around the area, as well as maybe incentivize citizen science to kind of help also push the decision makers in those local area. So that's just kind of a rundown of the challenge. So I want to introduce to you our guest speaker tonight, which is who is Vivian Cumbo. She is the senior program manager at the Great Barrier Reef Foundation, Resilient Reefs. She has worked for the last 15 years in Australia and international research in coral reefs and temperature reef systems, including extensive experience on marine restoration. She has a PhD from James Cook University and has worked a lot across industry, science, and communities. Welcome, Vivian.
Thanks for that. My pleasure to be here. I'll just put my screen up and share it. So can you see my presentation screen?
Yes.
Yes, great. Thanks very much for that lovely introduction. Yeah, so I'm Vivian Cumbo, and I'm here to give a talk about coral health and also a program I'm working in, the Resilient Reef Initiative. Okay, to first understand about coral health, we need to know first what corals are and where they're located. So corals are an animal. They're a marine invertebrate called cnidaria. And typically corals form compact colonies, as you can see here in this image. So each of these colonies is actually made up of many tiny identical polyps that secrete calcium carbonate to form this hard skeleton that provides the structure onto reefs. Now, corals are found in oceans and seas around more than 100 countries around the world. They're mostly found in the tropical locations between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. And you can see here all these dots are where corals are located. Now, most corals grow in shallow waters where sunlight can reach them, and reef-building corals, the ones that secrete the calcium carbonate, generally need water temperatures between 20 degrees to 32 degrees Celsius to survive. But this is really location dependent on what requirements they require. Okay, so what's the current status of the health of coral reefs worldwide? Well, approximately 75% of coral reefs are under threat because of global and local shocks and stresses. So in the first half of my presentation, I'm going to give an overview of the different stresses and shocks. And these include global stresses like high ocean temperatures and ocean acidification, and local stresses and shocks such as fishing threats, pollution, coastal development, crown of thorns starfish, and cyclones. Okay, to understand the first global stressor, which is high temperatures, we first have to understand what is actually causing the warming. Now, the Earth is warmed by a natural process known as the greenhouse effect. So when the sun's energy reaches the Earth's atmosphere, some of it is reflected back into space, and the rest is absorbed and re-radiated by greenhouse gases. Now, greenhouse gases include water vapors, carbon dioxide, methane, nitric oxide, ozone, just to name a few. Now, these greenhouse gases trap heat in the atmosphere and warming it, and therefore warming the surface of the Earth. Now, this process actually maintains the Earth temperature at 35 degrees Celsius, warmer than it would otherwise be. And this actually allows life on Earth to exist. The problem is some human activities, such as burning fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas, and agriculture and land clearing are generating more greenhouse gases. Observational evidence on how the atmosphere has changed over time was clearly shown by Charles Keeling. Now, he actually measured the greenhouse gas, the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, and he measured it every year from 1958 until his death in 2005. And then someone else took up the mantle and kept measuring it. And he clearly showed that the concentration of CO2 was increasing in the atmosphere over time. And with this increase in greenhouse gases from human activity, there is an increase in the heat trapped in the Earth's atmosphere, which results in an increase in temperature at the Earth's surface. Now, this warming of the Earth's surface is also warming ocean temperatures, which is shown here on this graph. Here we have the annual ocean heat content on the y-axis, and we have time on the x-axis. And as you can see, from 1995, which was only 25 years ago, to current day, there has been a rapid rise in ocean heat content. And this is especially so in the shallow waters where corals live. Now, I just want to draw your attention, we've actually been talking about this earlier today, but I just want to draw your attention to a quote in the very recently released IPCC report on climate change. Now, this IPCC report is written over an 8-year period by hundreds of climate scientists and includes thousands of research studies. And whilst we have known this message for a long time, this report message to policymakers was the most clear and direct it has ever been. And it states that it's unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. Widespread and rapid changes in the atmosphere, ocean, cryosphere, and biosphere have occurred. And essentially, the report is saying we are running out of time to do something about this. Okay, so how is ocean warming actually affecting corals? Well, corals live in a symbiotic relationship with an algae, and these tiny algae, which are these tiny green dots here, actually live within the cells of the coral, which are the larger, paler green. Now, because the algae is a plant, they photosynthesize and they actually produce energy, which they then give to the coral. And this energy from the algae is very important for the coral's survival. However, when ocean temperatures increase, the corals become stressed, and so the algae actually leaves the coral, which is known as coral bleaching. So as a result of the algae leaving, the corals are bleached and they're also vulnerable. And if the temperature stress is not removed, the corals will die. So if you look at these two images here, you can clearly see what I mean by coral bleaching. The first image is a healthy coral, and the next one is a bleached one, how they look after the corals, the algae has left them. So mass bleaching events have occurred around the globe. In fact, 75% of tropical reefs have experienced coral bleaching. And here is an example of many bleaching events that have occurred on the Great Barrier Reef in 2016, 2017, and 2020. So the Great Barrier Reef is this large section, it spans this large section here of the northeastern Australia. And as you can see in this 2016 graph, the most severely bleached reefs, which are in red, spanned the upper section of the Great Barrier Reef into the middle section. And these upper section reefs are actually quite pristine reefs with not many other human impacts. Then in 2017, we saw bleaching again, and some in the upper section and a lot in the middle section of the Great Barrier Reef. And then there was a 2-year reprieve, but that's quite a short amount of time. And then bleaching occurred again, and this time in the middle section of the reef and in the lower sections of the reef. So these frequent severe bleaching events are problematic at some locations because there actually isn't enough time between bleaching events for bleached corals to recover, and also for new baby corals to settle onto the reef and survive and grow. So coral bleaching is actually impacting the entire reef ecosystem. Firstly, dead corals cannot sustain a coral reef. So this can result in a phase shift from coral-dominated to an algal-dominated environment. And since the corals are gone, which provide the hard, complex structure of reef, you also see a loss in this topographical complexity, which is basically what I mean by this is these 3D shapes created by the reef. Now, this complexity is really important because it provides houses for many other reef animals, including fish and invertebrates. So with this decline in complexity, we also see a decline in fish numbers, and we also don't see new fish recruiting or coming to the reef. And this decline in fish numbers has a flow-on impact onto fisheries and onto people who rely on the reef for food and for income. Okay, so moving on to another global stressor. This is also caused by increases in CO2 concentration, and it's known as ocean acidification. So as the amount of dissolved CO2 in the ocean is increasing, we're actually seeing the pH of the oceans decreasing, and this is making the oceans more acidic. So corals build their skeleton structures, which creates the reef structure by precipitating calcium carbonate. And this process of building their skeletons cannot proceed when the ocean is more acidic. What's more, the old dead corals that provide some of the reef structure dissolve more easily when the ocean is more acidic. And therefore that reef complexity that I spoke about earlier is also lost more quickly. Okay, so I've discussed some of the global stresses that impact reefs worldwide, but what about stresses that impact reefs at a local scale? So one of the largest local stresses that impact reefs is fishing threats. So over 55% of the world's reefs are threatened by overfishing and or destructive fishing. But what is overfishing? Overfishing is catching more fish than the system can support. This results in a decline in fish populations, and it can also impact the reef's ecosystems due to issues such as removing key species from the ecosystem or killing animals that were not the target animal. This is known as bycatch, and you can actually see this here in this image where these turtles have become entangled in fishing gear and could die because they can't get back up to the surface to breathe. Now, overfishing also impacts human communities that depend on these areas because there's less fish to eat or sell to support the community. Other fishing threats are also destructive fishing. And in some locations around the globe, people use explosives or poison, cyanide, to kill or stun fish. And as you can imagine, explosives destroy corals and turn the reef into rubble, as you can see in this image here. And so there's actually no complexity left on this reef. And cyanide poisons also can damage coral and kill them. Okay, another local stressor affecting coral health is pollution. There's actually many forms of pollution, and I can't cover them all here today, but some of the main land-based pollutions include sediments from erosion, which has occurred due to deforestation and clearing farmland. And as you can see in this picture, the sediments are actually entering the reef system by first entering the rivers and then pluming out over the reef. And these plumes can actually smother and kill corals and other organisms on the reef. Other land-based pollutions include nutrients from livestock manure and fertilizer used to grow crops. These nutrients can run out over the reef, and just like on land, these nutrients promote the growth of plants, which in the ocean is algae. So large amounts of algae on reefs can actually block light from the corals or actually outcompete corals or outgrow corals for space. And finally, there are chemical pollutants from mining or pesticides which can impact the health of coral reefs. There's also marine-based pollutions, and these include discharge from commercial and recreational vessels. It includes rubbish and trash, which you've probably all heard about the insurmountable amount of plastic and microplastic pollutions that are in the ocean and are currently being integrated into the marine food chain because organisms are eating this plastic. And there's also oil spills from vessels, which can result in coral degradation and mortality. Now, another local stressor that is especially prevalent to this region is the crown of thorns starfish. Now, the crown of thorns starfish is a major contributor to loss of corals on the coral cover on the Great Barrier Reef. These starfish eat the corals by inverting their entire stomach through their mouth and digesting the thin layer of soft tissue off a coral skeleton. So you can see here, this is a crown of thorns starfish, and you can see where it's eaten the coral tissue. All the white stuff is where it's actually eaten the coral tissue, and the brown is a healthy coral behind. Now, this is the world's largest starfish and can reach up to 80 centimeters in diameter and eat about 10 square meters of coral per year. Each adult female produces up to 65 million eggs per spawning season. And so the result is a lot of starfish. So on the Great Barrier Reef, there's actually a program which culls the starfish down to non-outbreak levels to try and control them. Another local threat to reefs is tropical cyclones. And you'll see here, I've actually called this a local shock, not a local stressor. And that is because cyclones are a sudden short-term event that disrupt or damage the reef and surrounding communities. So this is unlike a stress event where that's a gradual event, which is gradually but persistently weakening the reef system. So you can see clearly in these images the damage that a cyclone can do to a reef. This is Scott Reef off Western Australia, which got hit by Cyclone Lua in 2012. And in some of the reef locations, it was turned into complete rubble by the cyclone, where there's very few living corals and not much complexity left. Okay, so that's all the bad news about coral health. But what are we doing to help? So I actually work for the Great Barrier Reef Foundation. It's a science-based charity driving immediate change needed to save coral reefs. The foundation exists to preserve the reef for future generations, and it's the only charity in the world dedicated exclusively to generating practical and financial support for the reef. I work for the Resilient Reef Initiative within the Great Barrier Reef Foundation. So this is a global initiative that partners with reef managers, reef communities, and global experts to develop new solutions to respond to climate change and local threats. Our aim is to build resilience into the reef ecosystem and the communities that depend on them by providing the tools and knowledge to survive, adapt, and recover from those global and local stresses and shocks, which I just spoke about. So we actually have 4 key pillars to create deep and lasting change. Firstly, we provide support in the creation and funding of a new leadership role, which is embedded within the Reef Management Authority. It's called the Chief Resilient Officer. Our thinking is that by embedding the leadership role within the management entity, we have the opportunity to institutionalize resilient thinking and to build the capacity of local reef managers to think more broadly about protecting their reefs. The second pillar is about strategic planning. The Chief Resilient Officer and their team are provided with a suite of tools and resources to run a planning process which is inclusive of First Nations people, community, industry, scientists, and management. And at the end of the process, a holistic resilience strategy is developed, which is owned by the Reef Management Authority and includes an organised, prioritised list of actions to protect both the reef and the local communities. The third pillar is around connecting reef managements to each other and to a global network of technical marine scientists, social scientists, governance experts, and resilient thinkers. And finally, we provide access to funding so reef managers can implement their priority actions identified during the resilient strategy planning process. So as you can see very quickly that the support provided through our initiative is end-to-end, providing new resources and leadership roles to drive the process and the strategic planning piece, providing connection to global best practices and scientists to accelerate learning and to feed the latest science in, and then providing funding to implement on-ground actions. And each site has access to over $1 million to implement their actions. So currently our program includes 5 World Heritage listed reef sites. These beautiful World Heritage marine sites have some of the most diverse array of marine species in the world and are important breeding grounds for a large number of animals. And these reefs also support numerous local communities. So we're working with Ningaloo in WA, we're working with Belize, with Palau, and with New Caledonia. We're also partnered closely with the Great Barrier Reef. However, in light of the significant investment, planning and implementation already underway in the Great Barrier Reef, we are not actively rolling out the Resilient Reef Plan at this site. Instead, the Great Barrier Reef Foundation and the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority serves as a two-way learning partner. They provide advice and expertise to other sites, and also they get learnings from the Resilient Reef model and from the connection to experts in the global network. So in closing, I believe the preservation of coral reefs is a cause for our times, a scientific, technological, and engineering challenge like no other that will require the involvement of our best and brightest minds to succeed. We have reached a stage in the reef's history where our actions over the next 2 decades will be critical to its ongoing survival. And this is where you come in. The Space-Based Challenge is looking for the best and brightest minds to help find new and innovative solutions to address climate change issues that impact coral reefs. I'm excited about the potential projects and solutions you might come up with. When thinking about your project ideas, think about what you can come up with that will help reef managers or local communities respond to global or local stresses that I've spoken about. It could be something like creating new apps to disseminate satellite data on a more user and phone-friendly platform, or developing novel methods of monitoring reef health using satellite data. Either way, I'm delighted that you've been able to join us today, not only to hear about the crucial work being done for the reef, but to understand how you can help too. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Vivian. That was really informative. Yeah, I actually have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, it's really great to hear about the initiatives that you're doing with the Great Barrier Reef Foundation. Can you give some examples of what projects kind of like have been initiated on the ground with kind of like your initiatives,
or how you could help reef managers?
Yeah.
In a practical way.
Yeah, what have they sort of like done?
So in Ningaloo, we've got the Chief Resilience Officer has been in place for a while. So that's someone that we have employed through the Resilient Reefs Initiative. And he's been working very closely with a lot of other organisations like parks and everything in WA. And so first of all, it's been amazing just the connections that have been created through this. So by having him on the ground, and it's connected a lot of people that initially weren't connected, like other reef managers, to get everyone kind of on the same page of thinking. It's also amazing the connection that's happened with the Great Barrier Reef as well. So Ningaloo, even though they're in Australia, they haven't had much conversations with managers on the Great Barrier Reef. So it's really improved that. They've also been developing for quite a while now a new resilience strategy plan, which is a really new holistic approach on how to develop, how to address climate problems, how to adapt as the environment is changing, how to roll out these solutions. And so there's many different stages to that, which I could get into more detail, but maybe it would be better if we had more time. But yeah, so it really is it's a new holistic way of trying to approach the question of how to build resilience into the reef. And it's bringing in all the players that are actually going to be affected by this and trying to get everyone onto the same page so that when something does happen, it's not a reactionary response. You've already thought about this and planned for it.
Yeah.
I assume that you can protect coral health better if you identify areas like protected areas and you try to remove the other stressors from that area. It may be difficult to deal with, general problems like the warming ocean or the acidification of the ocean, but at least you can remove some of these other stress factors.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of the, if you can find out ways of dealing with the local stresses, it does take the pressure off the system a bit. But then in saying that, the global stresses are also they're the overriding problem. Temperature is a huge problem. And in that graph that I showed of the Great Barrier Reef, where in 2016, all the bleaching happened in the up higher ends of the reef, that they're actually really untouched areas. So removing impacts is the way forward. It's the only way forward at the moment, but also addressing the bigger problem, which is climate change, is also critically important.
As I understand, there's just in the last few months, the Allen Coral Atlas has introduced a bleaching layer, or when they get potential alerts for warm temperatures, they can start monitoring and identify how the coral has changed in appearance and identify bleaching events. But I also understand that there's one challenge is that if you really go through the whole cycle of healthy coral, bleaching event, and even dead, moving on to dead coral, that when the algae comes back and grows on top of the dead coral, it can appear like healthy coral. I mean, or it's very hard to distinguish. And that's one of the, it's a research problem, but we're sort of tossing it out to see if anyone has any ideas about how to distinguish.
Yeah. So you're correct. It's very hard to distinguish using satellite data. Obviously, when you're in the field and you're diving on it, you can definitely see that it's dead coral with algal turf growing on it. But using satellite data, I would imagine it looks very similar to a living coral, because coral is coral and algae. Coral and algae mixed together. So yeah, I guess that could be a good problem to try and help solve, is how to work out to differentiate the two, a living coral and a dead one covered in algae.
Yeah. With your kind of you've been in this for like 15 years already, and have you seen any changes in the way that at least locally people actually deal with either preservation or decision making for sustainability with the advent of satellite imagery and kind of like all of this data that is now giving people a much more understanding of what the challenges and the problems are.
Yes, I think I've seen a shift in the way, well, first I've seen a shift in the way people have been dealing with the climate change problems on reefs. Beforehand, we were trying to conserve reefs and address issues there, and now there has been a lot of shifts towards how can we maintain what's there, how can we restore reefs, how can we, using satellite data, I'm not I don't know much about that, but I do think that using the NOAA data to understand where bleaching is about to occur really does help to ramp up a response from everyone. We all know, okay, the bleaching started here, so this is going to be our response, whether it be documenting a bleaching event or even how to respond to a bleaching event to protect the reefs. There's talk of putting shade out on a reef to try and shade it from multiple days of sunlight and heating to try and protect it. And all these things have come about because of the data that's rolling in.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've dominated asking questions, but there are actually people online, and I don't know if you have any questions for Vivian. Either you can just like unmute or just put your questions on the chat.
I have one question.
Yep.
Sorry, I was a bit late just because my computer decided it didn't want to work. But I was just wondering if I'm able to watch this because I missed a bit of the information and you've said a lot of stuff, and I'd just like to be able to like go over it if possible.
Yeah, we're actually recording the session, so we'll be able to share the video on the website at spaceforearth.org afterwards.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Let's see. Anybody else have any?
And if anyone has any questions after they hear this recording, they can also email me and I can respond.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is your email linked on the space.org as well?
I either I can put your email or maybe Vivian, you can put your email in the chat right now, so at least the people in the audience can.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay.
Awesome. Anything else?
And there was, I saw that Alan Coral Atlas released a paper just today with a very good detail about their how
they actually processing their data as well.
How they perform the analysis. And so let me see if I still have it in my, I'll add that to the,
yeah, so the link is on the the chat as well.
It's like a 4 megabyte PDF or something like that, but it's they talk about the challenge they have not being able to distinguish, healthy coral from coral with algae on top, and so that they just group that category together, and so that's remains an open question for the data. Yeah.
That's an important one to be able to.
Yeah, really. Yeah. So Vivian,
I just got one more question.
Oh yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. With solving like our own problem and creating a solution, would you recommend I focus on one individual like shock, or would it be better to focus on like a larger global scale problem?
Yeah, it's with the problem, it's really open, and it's sort of like the opinions of the judges according to the criteria as to how much your approach helps. And so so I think both of those have validity of focusing on a specific problem, focusing or looking at a global area, or You can also look at what's happening in a certain area, you know, and there, yeah, it's
yeah, I guess basically, yeah,
and all the
amazing
required by October is end of October is a start of an approach, because as soon as you get into the incubator, you can learn more and refine your approach and decide which direction you want to go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. So I think if we don't have any more questions, yeah, we're almost at the end of the hour anyway. Again, thank you, Vivian, for your presentation and for the Great Barrier Reef Foundation as well.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And I just wanted to acknowledge also our partners and supporters, of which, you know, the challenge will actually not be possible as well without their support. So our major partner, which is satellite company Planet, and then also our sponsors, which is the U.S. Embassy, Christchurch NZ, the New Zealand Space Agency, the Namaste Foundation, Greenlight Ventures, the Mars Academy, Engineering Dreams, and the Christchurch City Council. So thank you so much for all your support. And again, all of this information will be also uploaded on the website, and we'll be also sharing this on social media. So, and if you have any questions at all after this, just send us an email on info@spaceforearth.org, and then also go to the website as well. So thank you, everybody, and hopefully we'll see you again on the next info session.